Hi. Can I just say that I'm absolutely moved by the work that you do? Coming from where I come from and having experienced what I've experienced, I always wanted to know who was solving the problem. Like who was making the way out of no way. And it's y'all. Can y'all give yourself a round of applause? Seriously. My goodness. I'm going to talk to you today about something that has been near and dear to my heart ever since I understood the mechanics of what was going on. And that is, there's a reason why injustice for some ends up becoming injustice for us all, right? It's just about when it hits home. And I got to start from the first place I ever called home in Northeast Denver, my old hood of Park Hill. That is where I'm from. And I was born in a little house in the hood that looked a lot like where the Jacksons was from. You ever seen where the old, like where Michael Jackson's family was from? This little square house that didn't look like it could hold all the love that was in there, at least my house. And all of the dreams that were invested in the people who lived there. But 3223 Newport Street, right off of Martin Luther King Boulevard, is where I began. And it's so ironic because every place that there's a Martin Luther King Boulevard tends to be the hood. I don't know if you ever noticed that. Every Martin Luther King Boulevard tends to be the hood. But what made Denver so special was it had a special sense of irony. Because that street, Martin Luther King Boulevard, went right into Stapleton Airport, named for a Klansman. So go figure, that's Colorado sometime for you. We trying to make it better. I'm in a room full of folks who trying to do that. But here's one thing. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And there's a dollars and cents math to that. And I didn't know that I was living a life that was going to illustrate how these mechanics happen. But when I was born in the 1980s, goodness gracious, the median home price in Colorado was $76,000. In Park Hill, where I'm from, those homes were about $65,000 to $70,000, right? And so what I'm going to do is tell you a story in a series of zoom outs about how my life is centered in this web that we are all interconnected in that affects us all eventually if we don't address injustice, which everybody in here is doing. So, the first zoom out, redlining, ghettoization, and inherited wealth and inherited poverty. Here's the thing. I have heard so many people on certain news sources say these people need to take responsibility for themselves and pull themselves up by the bootstraps and just take some ownership. I'm like, in the hood, we blamed ourselves. We 100% blamed ourselves. We didn't just take on the responsibility. The burden of our surroundings hurt us to the core, to the point where it polluted our identity of who we are. Our very self-esteem was infected by these negative judgments about ourselves that seem to be validated by our environment, right? You see, it's like being raised in a factory farm. Like if you was to ask the chicken in the factory farm, what's your biggest problem? The chicken would say, man, these chickens right next to me, bro. Always pecking at me, messing up my feathers, taking my feed away, right? Ask those chickens in the factory farm and they will tell you that if they could just get some space from these other chickens, then they wouldn't have to be how they are. But who designed the farm? Who put these circumstances in place? I didn't know that my neighborhood was designed by something called redlining. Nobody was talking about redlining. Nobody was talking about ghettoization. Nobody was talking about how drawing lines on the map to divest from a certain neighborhood will create cycles of poverty that we were enduring. I just saw the gang activity. I just knew about the rolling 30s and the trade deuces. That's what I knew about, right? I knew that I had to duck sometimes. I knew that like I grew up living in fear of drive-by shootings. That's what I was afraid of, okay? And slowly, we began to realize that something else was happening in our environment. Pollution. I don't know if you ever driven down I-70, right over there, by the Purina dog food factory. Well, Park Hill is downwind of that place. And if the wind blows wrong, the whole neighborhood smelled like kibbles and bits. It's true. What was also true in the time when I was a kid was that Stapleton Airport, oh, the irony. Stapleton Airport was literally right there. And I remember you could see the rivets on the wings and the tread on the tires. It felt like, and I was like afraid that planes were going to land on top of us, right? And so what did that do? Drive down the property value even further, right? But what I didn't know is that the cycles of poverty in my family had began long before I was born. Flashback, we're gonna zoom out. I am named for a man named Theo George Wilson. He is my grandfather, and he was a Tuskegee Airman of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. I'm the grandson of an American hero. I like the clapping, but I ain't had nothing to do with that. That was just my granddaddy. You know what I'm saying? But my grandfather came back from World War II, and he was not allowed to participate in the GI Bill just because of the color of his skin. My grandpa came back from World War II a hero. He had saved 22 lives on the battlefield. My grandpa could only work as a bookbinder. He had skills far beyond that, but that was the only place hiring colored men at the time, raising my father in the projects. But if my grandfather were allowed to live where the other GIs were living, well, that was New York City. He would have had a house in the suburbs, and that would have appreciated in value. Then my father would not have been raised in the projects. My father was a gangster. It's true. He was an actual gang member. My father was saved from the gang life by two things. Malcolm X, whom he met on two separate occasions, and joined Malcolm X's organization after Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam. And then the draft. Had my father been in college, he might have avoided that. But my father's ineptitude in studying, he just wasn't good at studying. He was smart. My dad is smart, but he wasn't good like that, right? Had the resources been there for my grandfather, my father probably would have been something else besides a GI in the Vietnam War. Father came back with PTSD and Agent Orange poisoning and had to raise me with the best of his abilities. So he and my mother met in the 70s. You know, you see my dad in the bell bottoms, you know what I'm talking about? Looking like a reject from the Dolomite series, you know. The butterfly collar and them leisure suits. That's how I met my father, okay? But he was doing the best that he could. But these are the chains of events that landed me in that red line neighborhood, okay? Now, at the time, my mama worked for a place called Mountain Bell, and she was making an entire $34,000 a year. But that was the 80s. Adjusted, that's about $130,000 in today's money. And because they were a two-parent household, my dad ended up getting a promotion in the 80s where he was making an entire $50,000 a year. Well, translated, that's $191,000 in today's money. So due to circumstances out of my control, we moved out of the hood and in the middle class. We was moving on up like George and Wheezy. That was one of the first TV shows I remember, show you how old I actually am, right? We were moving on up in the age of Reaganomics. We moved into the middle class out of Park Hill. We moved all the way down Monaco, man. We was over there on the south side of Denver, right? Just in time for Reaganomics to wage war on the middle class. Zoom out number 2. When they talk about class warfare, it generally be like when the poor get mad and pick up their pitchforks and go after the rich. Oh, no, 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 no. That's not how the first shot is fired. The first shot is fired in the creation of poverty in itself by those with the means and power to create it. And for those of us in the American middle class who have climbed out tooth and nail, any attack on the middle class is an attack via class warfare for those who have the artillery to do so. Well, y'all might have remembered a thing called trickle-down economics. Remember hearing about trickle-down economics? Supply-side economics, right? It was a way to get us out of the problems that we were in, right? The problem with that, and I think that I'm talking to a room full of folks who understand this, right, is that oftentimes it don't trickle. It just be there, hoarded by the folks who it eventually was given to, like wealth, the wealth effect they talk about, right? Also what happened in the 1980s was union busting. Union busting. Ronald Reagan, air traffic controllers, 12,000 folks fired because they were picketing, they were striking. And Reagan set the precedent that this is how we handle those who are trying to collectively bargain, right? When these unionized workers began, 1/3 of all workers were unionized. By the time Ronald Reagan leaves office, that was cut in half. So with the economy, why we need affordable housing in the first place? I know sometimes you probably looked at affordable housing places like, dang, can I get a piece of this action? Like, this is looking good, right? No, seriously. Why aren't wages keeping pace with expenses? See, I'm talking to you about something bigger today, because I'm in a room full of bright folks who know how to take action. This inequality train ain't slowing down if we don't take a look at what's going on and its roots. And unfortunately, a precedent was set by destroying the unions that now, today, only 1/10 of all workers are unionized. Just in an 8-year time frame, right? Another thing that happened, the rollback of welfare benefits under our good buddy Ronald Reagan. The phantasmagorical welfare queen. She's taking all the resources, feeding kids lobster dinners on the government dime. She's black. Goodness gracious, right? We'll see how this comes back around in a second. But what ended up happening was these dog whistle politics ended up having folks in the working class divided and voting away the very benefits that were there to support them. A lot of folks who are perhaps on the other side of the political, I don't know who's in the room with me, believe that welfare programs were always set up to benefit minorities. Excuse me, we couldn't participate for the first 30 years. From the Great Depression to the 1960s, black folks couldn't even participate in these welfare programs. What changed that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, a Gallup poll showed that 70% of white Americans before that believed that the government had an activist role to play in making quality of life better. After 1964, that dropped to 35% of white Americans who believed that. Dog whistles about deservedness began to take a hold, and they really geared up in the Reagan administration. And finally, the war on drugs expanded the criminalization of addiction, mass incarceration, and making poverty a moral failure. It just didn't work hard enough. Guys didn't take action, right? Anybody can make it in America. That really began to take a hold during that time period, right? And most importantly, even after the civil rights movement, the black and white employment gap amounts to about $3.3 trillion in aggregate for black people per year, right? Post-civil rights inheritance gap amounts to about $4.2 trillion in lost assets, right? My family joined the middle class when things were reversing faster than ever, right? There's a really great book called The Black Tax by Sean Rochester. Look into it. It's easy to remember, The Black Tax. You can get it on Amazon right now, right? And we're moving into this era where I'm becoming a young man and I'm starting to take part in the economy. I'm starting to see how this affects me. I'm starting to find my place, right? And this is from Harvard University. So a lot of people are like, well, people, they drop statistics, but are they really reliable? Harvard's pretty smart. I don't know about, Harvard's smart, right? They have what's called an implicit association bias test. It's been taken by 3.5 million people and counting, right? 75% of Americans have an unconscious preference of white people to black people. It's what it is. Sometimes even black people. It's what it is. It happens, right? This factor is indeed a predictor of discriminatory behavior. And I think we've all heard about the 2002 Chicago University resume experiment. You may not be able to identify it as that, but you probably know, right? White-sounding names like Brandon and Emily were put on the same exact resume with the same exact credentials, right? And the white names received 50% more callbacks than the resumes with names like Tyrone and Lakeisha. Same resume, same credentials, right? And here's what's not often talked about, because this is the thing that would kind of affect me without me knowing it. Nobody had to spray the N-word anywhere or anything, right? Is that the callback rates increased by 30% with those with higher credentials. Black names saw no statistical difference in that, and it took 8 years of experience to overcome this discrepancy, right? And this goes on and on and on into the point where I'm entering the economy, right? Because I decided in this crazy year called 2008 to buy a mutual fund 3 weeks before it all hit the fan, right? Zoom out, number 3, the blowback. The blowback to injustice hits white America. In the crash of 2008, it hit everybody, by the way. But here's what happened, and a lot of people don't understand this, right? The seeds of the subprime mortgage crash in 2008 were planted as early in the mid-90s in the black community. Planted as early as the mid-90s, right? Nobody cared. There was a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against a group of folks named Chase Mortgage Brokers. And it revealed that by the year 2000, as they did the aggregate data, it showed that over 50% of mortgages in the black community were subprime. By the year 2000, this happened in the mid-90s is when it began, right? Well, how did it lead to the crash? Remember that guy, Bill Clinton? Remember that guy? Yeah, he was president when I was in high school. God, I'm old. Goodness gracious. Yeah, so to his credit, despite all the craziness with that guy, he actually did end up balancing the budget pretty well. We have a debt clock that is on Wall Street, and that dude was winding it down. The economy in America was on track to be completely debt-free by the time this dude left office. He just did one crazy thing. Dude repealed the Glass-Steagall Act on his way out the door. What was the Glass-Steagall Act? It set up a wall between your assets in the bank and the stock market. Because somewhere along the line in the Great Depression, they figured it out already. You're not supposed to be gambling with people's life savings. Just a general rule of thumb. Don't do that, right? The Glass-Steagall Act was there, but what happened was that people were complaining about regulations. We don't like the regulations. So he repeals it on the way out the door. Well, what happened? All of those toxic mortgage instruments that were running rampant in the black community, which, by the way, black homeowners who already had homes were being steered into those in a predatory way. It's not that these new people who didn't deserve loans, that was the general mythology of the crash of '08, right? These new people who didn't have the credit were given loans and they didn't deserve them and then they couldn't pay and so it crashed. Nonsense. I wanted to say another word, but we'll use this in polite company. Nonsense. It's not what happened. People who had houses in the black community were predatorily steered into refinancing in a subprime way. And these corporations like Chase Mortgage Brokers, man, they perfected those products. And when Clinton deregulates the market, they break free. And these folks who had been perfecting these predatory lending practices in the black community now sold them to the white community as option arms, adjustable rate mortgages, creating a shadow market of $58 trillion. That's a lot of non-money money. Wonder why the house of cards collapsed. They literally hired quantum physicists to try to figure out the math of these bundles of mortgages, and literal quantum physicists could not figure this out. It was all a giant self-deception with zero integrity that ended up collapsing, right? And here's what a lot of people don't understand. We're still in the crash of '08. It never went away. It never got better, right? The Fed policy of quantitative easing decoupled financial markets from the health of the overall economy. Why are we talking about this? Because we got to clear our eyes. Listen, here's how I'm going to break this down. There is the actual productivity economy, and then there's the speculation economy, right? One's the factory, one's the casino. It used to be that you could only speculate on what was going on in the factory. What's the factory? Productivity, gross domestic product, the things we trade, wages, home ownership, what we're buying, what folks are selling, small businesses, that's the factory. The stock market is just what you think is worth, right? And what happened in the crash of '08 is that the Fed's policies ended up decoupling the factory from the casino. Now we have what's called a financialized economy. All this corporate buybacks and too big to fail action is when somebody gets, look, okay, I don't want to sound like a dude who don't like folks with money, okay? Whatever they be calling that. I ain't against billionaires, but can we have billionaires maybe after we eliminate some of these things that are fixable with that excess money, right? After. Because here's how bad it really got. Inequality has accelerated to Gilded Age levels. And folks don't realize that now just 3 Americans, you might have heard of these guys. One of them's named Warren Buffett. He seems pretty cool, right? Compared to like other billionaires, he's like the coolest one. Rocket Man Jeff Bezos, and the guy who the right wing really hates these days, Bill Gates, right? Well, all 3 of these guys combined own more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans. 3 dudes could sit in those 3 empty chairs right there. They shouldn't have more combined wealth than everybody in this room. They shouldn't, right? They've got, dude, these numbers are insane. And they didn't get that way just because they worked hard. You can't work that hard. There aren't enough hours in life. There's no work ethic there. It's speculation. I made a profit. I buy back my stock goes up, and then everybody's making money because they bet on it. Has nothing to do with productivity. Did you make a better product? Did good old American capitalism end up making you more competitive? That's not what's happening, right? Inflation-adjusted value of the average home has stayed flat since 2010. Inflation-adjusted. Doesn't matter how the prices are going up. When you adjust for inflation, these values are flat, right? Somebody's in here familiar with student debt. Man, somebody has some of that? Yeah, once or twice, right? Student debt on average for millennials, folks like me, even though I'm like the oldest millennial on earth, I'm like the first millennial. Student debt is now on average 100% of annual income. And for the worst off of us millennials, it's 372%, right? And in 2019, a supposedly good economic year for us, right? Black wealth was literally 1/7 of white wealth. 1/7, right? Some statistics, like the Pew Research Foundation, saw that it was like 1/14. It depends on how you like crunch the numbers and who you're like including and all the factors, but it ain't even, it ain't equal comparative to our numbers, right? And that means that a smaller percent of us Black Americans own houses than we did during the time of Jim Crow. This is where we are, right? And then COVID hit. And then COVID hit, right? I'm going through my notes because these notes be noting. Hold on. Right. So here's what's going on. COVID exposed the fact that a financialized economy ain't producing much. COVID exposed how much we had leaned into speculation over production. And it leaned into how, when the Federal Reserve makes these great reports, using aggregate data is the wrong move. Why? Because my income is calculated alongside of Kim Kardashian's. We're both Americans, so we're both together in the aggregate data? No, dude, you gotta splice that down. You gotta shred it, you gotta make it smaller, right? Aggregate data is the reason why folks get away with hiding the true scale of inequality. This is the shiniest Great Depression we have ever seen in life, right? And so a few things happened during COVID that really hit the Black community real hard, right? And that is that in the initial lockdown, 41% of Black businesses closed their doors. Now, if you lost 41% of your blood, you would not be okay. 41% of Black businesses, most of which were sole proprietorships, meant that a lot of equity was lost. A lot of those businesses came back. Don't get it twisted. A lot of them came back. The equity did not. And now we're literally in the same financial position as we were at the end of the year 2010, I believe, right? And so as I look for my notes, this is one of them things that just be happening. I got you. Here we go. I found it. Yay for me. We had the largest shift upward in wealth in history. That's wild. Like this is talking about like history. Do you know what we've been through? We've been through like literally colonization, Jim Crow, like the Gilded Age. We've been through a lot. Shifting $1.3 trillion upwards means that our future is on shaky legs unless we do something. I know this seems doom and gloom, but I got some solutions at the end. Don't worry about that, right? But what's going on is that there is no state in this country right now where 40 hours a week on minimum wage can buy you a 2-bedroom apartment. We all gonna need some affordable housing soon enough, right? This is something that is not inevitable, right? And I talk more about this when I do my diversity, equity, inclusion speech. Yeah, I'll be talking about that DEI stuff. I just said DEI in public. That's like a no-no. And by the way, while I'm on this subject matter, legacy admission, folks, telling folks who are hired because of diversity, equity, inclusion that they didn't earn it is wild work. It's wild work. But that's for another speech. So now we got to talk about what these solutions look like. This is the final zoom out that I'm about to do with y'all. Because here's the thing. The most powerful weapon in the world is not an intercontinental hypersonic ballistic nuclear missile. It's close, but not quite. The most powerful weapon in the world is an accurate assessment of the situation. An accurate assessment of the situation. We have to see the problem for what it is. And one of the things that stops us from seeing the problem for what it is the human brain don't do good with big old numbers. Like past like 150. This is scientifically proven. We have a hard time conceptualizing what this looks like. When we talk about $1 million versus $1 billion versus $1 trillion, the only way that I've had it effectively explained to me is in terms of time. So we're going to break it down. If a dollar was a second, how long is 1 million seconds? 1 million seconds was the beginning of October. It's 11 days. 1 million seconds. So if 1 million seconds is 11 days, how long is 1 billion seconds? 1 billion seconds ago, Bill Clinton was beginning his first term in office, and Michael Jackson was preparing for the 1993 Super Bowl. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. 1 million seconds ago, it was still October. 1 billion seconds ago was the Clinton administration. How long is 1 trillion seconds? 1 trillion seconds ago, we were in the Ice Age, before the last Ice Age. 1 trillion seconds ago, there were woolly mammoths walking around on Earth. 1 trillion seconds ago is so long ago that we're closer now to the building of the pyramids by far than we are to 1 trillion seconds ago. Now contemplate this in dollars. What's $1 million look like in physical form? $100 bills, $1 million. You can fit it in a suitcase like they do on them action movies. You actually can. It's a big suitcase. It's like a big suitcase, dude. And you got to compact them mugs, but they could fit. $1 billion in $100 bills is a luxury sedan worth, like the same size as a car in $100 bills. $1 trillion is a 5-story building of $100 bills, an entire city block wide. That's what's going to waste here. When we talk about how to end homelessness and the cost that it would take, most estimates are around $20 to $50 billion. We have more money than that offshored in this country every single year to tax havens in Europe. Like, in fact, 10 times more money than that, right? We got to get pissed off. That's part of the solution. Anger gets you off your ass and gets you to move. I'm angry about this. I'm furious about this. As a father, I'm looking at the future. I know what's coming down the pike if we don't do anything, but we got to see this for what it is. This level of waste that we have, when we spend all this money on our military budget, this is our money impoverishing public wealth. We don't talk about public wealth a lot, but the fact is, private wealth is like private wealth. It's what you got in your pocket. It's what be offshored in these tax havens. Public wealth is like light rail. Public wealth used to be housing projects, right? Public wealth is the roads and the bridges and the things that are falling apart. It's our money. Municipally, we are impoverished because somebody has captured our wealth and put it into blowing up kids. That should make us mad. So the first step is actually getting pissed at the size of how much is being wasted on things that don't matter, right? Next thing is, we got to vote in candidates. We got to vote in I'm sorry, is it election year? We got to vote in candidates. This makes me upset. Who don't take money from price gouging real estate developers. We got to see who's in their pockets, and we can find this out. A lot of this is opensecrets.com. A lot of this stuff is Freedom of Information Act, but we have to become politically involved enough because we have to know what's at stake. It's your money used in inappropriate ways to exacerbate the poverty that we are trying to fight against when we try to create affordable housing. We got to look at this circular firing squad and look at who we're electing because these folks can be elected out. I've worked on campaigns to get folks out of office who contributed to the gentrification of 5 Points. I've done that. Get money in there. We have that power. We have the capacity, right? Third, introduce broader anti-price gouging legislation that extends to grocers as well, using the bills that have been passed to stop gouging in real estate as a legal precedent. Very important. This can be done. A lot of people don't know this. This was a little weird bit of presidential history. You know who really was like an enemy of price gouging? Richard Nixon. I was surprised too. I was like, wow, how? Really? What year? Right? 1973. When we were in the middle of that crisis, Richard Nixon says, if y'all raise prices, you corporate folks, I will come and arrest you. I will arrest you for raising prices. Like, dude, Biden, look at that, bro. You can do that, man. The president can do that? Wow, I don't know what's changed in America, but things like that can be done. Bold action, putting pressure on our elected officials to do that. It's possible. Now, once he got reelected, he stopped that, which made things go bad. But when he did it, they froze and stopped raising prices. This is possible. We can make this happen, right? If there's legislation that is passed to end price gouging in one area, we can end it in another area. That is a thing that can actually be a thing. And the next thing, and this is one of the most important things, next step, we got to stop sacrificing class solidarity for caste solidarity. This is major. Caste solidarity, where a poor white guy and a poor black guy are not on equal footing because the caste that the poor white guy is born into allows him access to the upper crust, whereas the caste that the poor black guy is born into, it doesn't allow him access to anything because he is in a lower caste, even though they make the same damn amount of money. And every time there has been a movement to bring folks together who have common interest, dog whistles of racism, and sometimes not that veiled, come in and divide folks based on the color of their skin. It's happening now. Dog whistles about worthiness. Who belongs here? Who paid into the system and who's just the person taking advantage of the benefits that hardworking Americans gave everybody? Always come in and divide, and it hurts us in the end. You remember we talked about Ronald Reagan and the war on drugs. Remember when we talked about how folks ended up voting away these social safety nets? When the crash of 2008 comes, who ended up ending their lives at the highest rates? It was non-high school educated white men. White men. There was a whole thing about it, the beached white male, right? Because those same folks who needed the social safety nets voted them away because they thought that black welfare queens were taking advantage of the system. The same folks who voted to create 100 times the penalty of crack cocaine as powder cocaine ended up falling flat when crystal methamphetamines was under the same schedule of narcotic, and white America ended up getting arrested and put in jail. It affects all of us. We've been allowed ourselves to be baited out. Look, I'm gonna be honest. Black folks will be like, we got a lot in common. Please get on board with us. And certain allies hear the call. But folks have to be made it clear that when you do that, when you invest in inequality, it will come back around to bite you. And it's about like a 30-year cycle, right? What's happening with police brutality in black communities is now finding its way into white communities. There is a video of a man, if you want to traumatize yourself, watch this, but it's very telling. Daniel Shaver, a young white man who was an exterminator for pests, who had a BB gun, and somebody called the police on him. The police played the same horrific, life-ending game with him. They killed him, as they do with black bodies. And when you look into the comments section, these same folks who are Second Amendment and the government better not go tyrannical are siding with the very cop the same way that they sided against George Floyd. We gotta stop allowing ourselves to be divided because of these petty racial issues when we have so much more in common. And finally, and most importantly, we have to remember a very important thing. We've been here before and we've won. People forget that. That's the problem when they don't teach history correctly. You don't know how strong you are. But the Gilded Age was something else. At the end of the 1800s, when we were just fighting for workers' rights, when we were just trying to unionize, back in the age of the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the Warburgs, these money barons that were sitting up here with, with the monocle and everything, like those guys, right? Children working in factories until they died, coal mines, black lung, the whole nine. The America that we ended up getting was because folks were inventing instruments that never existed before, like the weekend, 40-hour work weeks, paid time off, unions and stuff, strikes and stuff, never done before. But we don't know that we have been in times like this and made it through when we pulled together. And we got to look at the mistakes that we made in the past and not make them again. But we have the ability, but first we got to accurately assess the situation. First we have to understand what Dr. King said, that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Now I'm going to tell you something. I know enough to be a realist, but I don't know enough to be a pessimist. We live in a world that our ancestors would have thought would be impossible. Flat out. If you were to tell one of your ancestors from 1850, you can get from Los Angeles to New York in 5 hours, they say that's impossible. That's a 20-year trip, and by the time you get there, you're a whole different group of people. If you were to tell one of your ancestors from 1850, look, man, I can talk in real time on the internet to somebody in Dubai. I say, what's Dubai? What is the internet? What are these words you are speaking? The fact that we can get into flying metal tube, like literally airplanes used to be the wingsuits of their time. Like you had to be a daredevil to get on an airplane. Now it's the safest mode of travel. We are surrounded by miracles that folks did not conceive of generations before us. And we have to remember that regardless of the problems that we're facing, we have that potential inside us. And I was reminded of that when I was working in the hood, in a neighborhood that needed some of the housing services that y'all provide. Right off there, Emmanuel High School, youth engagement zone, right off the edge of 5 Points. And I remember I was teaching art because I draw. There was a young dude who came in every day. His name was Tyreek. You know what I'm saying? He was smooth. Tyreek always had a fresh lineup. Kicks was clean. Boy was sharp. He had that kind of like young hope and take over Jay-Z confidence, my dude. Cheer, right? Yep. I, as a young black man, knew what he's facing. I ain't tell him yet, though. Albert Einstein said that the most important decision you have to make in life is whether or not you live in a helpful or a harmful universe, because either way, you're right. Your attitude determines what you do with the data. And Tyree had like the best attitude. And I was inspired to write this poem. I'm going to share a poem with you. Can I share a poem with you? Let's share a poem with you. So, Tyree, he had that kind of attitude that could make the best of the same negative data that somebody would despair over. And so this is for the kids. This is for the kid in you, but this is like for the kids. This poem is called Impossible, and it goes like this. Tyreek walked in and was like, "Hey, yo, teacher, I want the finest girl in school to reject me. Just to see if I could walk off with my swagger still intact. I'm bad. My breath is like, Egg McMuffin. Double Dutching with double mint on my hopscotch tongue. My mouth is chalky. That's what confidence smell like. Girl, you tripping. I'm going to be somebody. Though it only makes Haley more high octane than a Hummer. But still, how can I ask for a record deal one day if I can't ask for your number? And if Thomas Edison failed over 3,000 times before making a light bulb, then can I use your cold shoulder as a hot stepping stone into history? I thought so. Impossible. And I said, Tyreek, impossible said the horse-drawn wagon to the jet engine. Impossible said the telegram wire to the text message. Impossible said the whites only sign to a young Sasha Obama. Did you know that you will encounter at least 400 items a day that would not exist without Leonardo da Vinci, a man who did not see the inside of a schoolhouse until the age of 14? Einstein flunked beginner's physics in 1899. Dr. King packed a pistol before 1960, and you have a dream. On the wrong side of a canyon, called tomorrow, have cried the river in between, and have misplaced your climbing equipment. But just because something is impossible does not make it not worth trying. Who cares if the summit is unreachable, if climbing that mountain makes you into one? Strangely, courage only comes after you do the thing that's scary. But ask David just how tall Goliath looks when he's on his back. You are a stone's throw away from being legendary. Angels have carved your statue in heaven and wait for a reason to ship it to earth. Don't let haters handle your postage. Believe me, my people know a thing or two about doubters. There was a time when the Negro brain was thought scientifically capable of inventing memory and nothing more. Citing, quote, "There is a physical difference between them that will forever forbid them from living together upon the footing of perfect equality with whites." Abraham Lincoln. Now, as articulate as that may be, I believe the black folks who dreamed up the air conditioner, almanac, elevator, traffic light, super soaker, cell phone, peanut butter, the pyramids, and fire will disagree. Mr. Lincoln, we got a wireless call from your ego. He said, "Emancipate that. Show me you're impossible. Tell me it can't be done. I'll show you a climb to a height unreachable is a climb already begun. Impossible," says the cancerous tumor to its extinction. Says war-torn parts of Africa to the return to global glory. Says the shooting rampage to its pending place in ancient history. Says the oil company to sustainable being the new word for duh. Do these corporate executives know that we inhale at least 10 sextillion atoms with every breath? Meaning, due to global wind patterns over 1 year's time, you will breathe an atom breathed by everyone on earth and who has ever lived. Meaning this poem is likely literally being brought to you by Shakespeare, Joan of Arc, Kennedy, Tubman, Dubois, Guevara, Yeshua, Yo Mama, and all of them asking, forget a millionaire who wants to be a mountain anymore. People who keep the script flipping more hardcore than parkour, reminding the haters, your failures are not my border patrol. My dreams ain't your dartboard. I want the finest minds in science who reject my potential and see if they can walk off with their faces still intact. Oh, I'm bad. My breath is like humanity, limitless, unbounded, and impossibly free. Thank you, that's my time. Oh.